founder and CEO of Good Data. Please join me as I talk about the future of BI and the key challenges of scaling real-time analytics. We will cover actionable insights, integration with AI and other advanced data techniques, personalizations, and most importantly, broader use of BI and analytics systems. These initiatives will define the successful organizations of tomorrow. I look forward to meeting you in person, and I wish you all a memorable CDOIQ Symposium.
Yep.
Still have one more. Welcome everyone. I would like to welcome both our in-person audience as well as our virtual audience. I am Lakshmi Randall from Informatica. I'm a co-track producer and moderator for this session. Forrester defines modern BI as impactful via insights-driven actions based on augmented capabilities, unifying all decisions, analytics, data sources, and data types across the organization. Personalization for every user persona in the organization based on adaptive, future-fit technology, pervasive, scaled across the organization, embedded in every work stream and every digital processes. Pretty broad and intense, isn't it? So how do you realize this vision of modern BI? And that's what this session is about, the future of analytics and BI. Before I introduce the speaker, a few housekeeping details. This session is being recorded and it will be made available as part of your registration with no additional cost. At the end of the session, there will be Q&A, so please raise your hand for the in-person audience. And if you really want your question answered, raise both of your hands. For the virtual audience, please submit your questions via Hua app Q&A tab. So our speaker for this session is Roman Stanek. Welcome, Roman.
Thank you.
Roman is CEO of Good Data. He started the company in 2006 with the mission of disrupting the BI. Show us the disruption.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. You know, I think it's appropriate that I'm talking in a building that deals with they try to invent fusion here at MIT. So let's talk about something a little more complex, future of analytics and BI, because that's not an easy topic, and you know, it's definitely something that is appropriate for summer CDO conference. Let's kind of start some creative juices and see how we can actually, what we will create as an industry in the next 10, 15 years. But before I start, I would like to reimagine for everyone here and virtually the BI away from a tool or platform. And I would like to start defining BI and analytics as an ecosystem. And as you will see, you know, we have to move away from these two kind of concepts into an ecosystem because, again, it's such a broad and complex problem that no single tool is no single tool that can actually solve this problem. And that's one reason. The second reason why you have to think about ecosystem is that one of the biggest problems in history of BI is really kind of the low level of adoption. If you look at, I don't know what the experience is, my estimate, you know, so let's start with Gartner. Gartner estimates that BI is used by 20% of population on any given company. I actually think it's optimistic. I think it's probably 5 to 10%, maybe even lower. And there's definitely a lot of shelfware and people who actually would like to use BI and they don't have access to it. And it's also not about the tools. You know, I just saw this morning. I saw one of the surveys in this event. What kind of prevents people from having more access, kind of using data more? And number one problem was data trust. And I think that analytics and BI can also help with data trust. So what problems we are solving? We are solving the fact that today people think about BI as tools problem or platforms problem. The second problem we are solving is that think about analytics as, again, as a low adoption tool, for few selected analysts, and everyone else still gets a bunch of PDF files or some static dashboards. And then we also, and the last problem we are solving is the problem of trust. So where did it come from? I actually look at BI, two types of BI projects that we see. One type of BI project is what I would call grassroots, that people actually get access to data, they somehow exchange, it's kind of a shadow IT, CSV files and flash drives and so on, and they load it into their copies of Tableau and so on. And that's kind of the bottom-up kind of grassroots approach to BI. And then you have highly centralized approach to BI, where there's a center of excellence and there is a centralized platform, there's a centralized semantic model that, team of people all the way from data engineers, data analysts, data modelers, governance, and so on. And both these kind of approaches have their problems. The grassroots problem obviously delivers no governance, delivers no repeatability, and again delivers very low degrees of trust. And unfortunately, the centralized problem also has problem with low degrees of trust, because people who work on data in these centralized systems have no understanding of the domains and semantics of these data sets, and it's very difficult for them to understand what these data sets mean. So the solution that we see more and more, and that's kind of my first part of my presentation, is how do we actually organize ourselves so that BI can actually be successful. And if you look at the latest trend today in analytics and BI, is to treat analytics or data as a product. So instead of having, again, either centralized team that works on everything and that this team doesn't understand all of the domain specifics, we have to actually go and start building different domains. We have to start building kind of teams and tooling and infrastructure that actually is based on the notion that anyone can only handle one domain, like customer or employee or product or branch and so on. So that's how we have to look at it. Again, not just from the tools perspective and the platform perspective, but we also have to look at it from the organization perspective, from the trust perspective. I know if data come from a team that specializes in my customer retention or customer experience, I know I can trust that team because that's all they do. They are highly specialized, that's all they do. And they don't necessarily are building a fully finished product. They actually supply data as a product to other teams so that other teams can actually kind of reuse it and combine it and compose it and so on. But we will get to composable analytics later. So this is one of the fundamental things that we have to change, and that is see analytics and data as a product that's focused on specific domains, and these domains then can be actually then shared and reused and so on. Which actually brings me to, I'm actually in this business for 20 years. 20 years ago, we invented something called service-oriented architecture, which was an architecture for application integration. And if you actually take that, 20-year-old diagram for SOA and you put it on this slide, you will actually see that we are finally getting something that resembles SOA in data. That we don't treat data as this random movement of processes and people and so on, that we actually are trying to build, I don't want to call it data-oriented architecture. That's kind of the acronym doesn't really work, but DOA, that's not good, but SOA works much better, but it is kind of, in a sense, it is kind of a data-oriented architecture. And it's for the first time, and again, history of data, as you know, it's all about centralized data warehouse producing kind of data for everyone and everything, and this is much more distributed, domain specific. So instead of having one team that supplies data to all of my data marts and so on, I actually have multiple teams, and then again, the analogy with SOA is very good. Then we have kind of transparent data access that we can share and reuse. So the question is, we may ask, like, where is BI and analytics in this? What actually is BI and analytics? And if you look at my definition of BI, it's actually reporting as one of the archetypes for data consumption. I actually believe that analytics and BI needs to span all these consumption archetypes, that it's not limited to reporting, that anytime someone consumes data, it needs to be consumed via analytics and BI, and it can be in digital apps, it can be in external data sharing, it can be in all different types of data consumption. So from my perspective, we have to broaden our perspective of data and analytics beyond just dashboards and visualization tools into what I started with, an ecosystem, a service-oriented ecosystem that can actually provide data in various forms, and very small portion of it, I will get to it, will be actually in reporting and dashboards and so on, because that's definitely not the future. Any question around this chart or anything about DOA? So let's go to the next slide. And so you may actually ask, like, again, how do I do this? And I will get to some of the details later, but this is just an example how we are mapping analytics on concept of data mesh, which is another concept that we see almost in every large enterprise these days, which data mesh is essentially organizational design for data as a product. And they define these kind of 4 interconnected components in data mesh. And I just put there like our own good data representation of these different objects, how we actually representing these objects in good data. Obviously, you can represent them with piece of paper and CVS file and Tableau, CSV file and Tableau report. But analytics needs to become this kind of interconnected set of services, and the data is a primary component in these services. And data needs to be transparent, needs to be trusted, needs to be discoverable, it needs to be secure, so that I can actually trust data coming from that team, and I can combine it with data set from other team. I can also combine it with data from my team, and I can produce a new data product and make it available to my consumers. So that's the basic concept of data mesh and data as a product. And again, as you can see, it's all about notion of semantic modeling, self-service platforms, composable data, and so on. And I will get to that in this kind of presentation of future of analytics and BI. So I just wanted to kind of put this perspective that BI is no longer kind of historically, if you look at BI, if you look at any large enterprise architecture, data architecture, you will see BI is kind of on the receiving end. Once we did all of the wonderful things and we kind of made data clean and trusted and governed and so on, then we actually put it somewhere in some Tableau server, or we put it into some sort of a reporting server and so on. And so what I'm arguing here is that analytics needs to become part of this kind of composable fabric. It needs to be part of this ecosystem. It's no longer kind of the last mile. It needs to be kind of much more embedded into everything what we do with data. So let's go and talk about, let's kind of look at my favorite definition of BI from Boris Everson. I think Forrester is like less than half mile from here, I believe. So this is very kind of relevant here. And I'm not going to read it here. You can actually read it. And but I will use this as kind of my kind of framework for how I will talk about future of analytics, because I actually think that Boris is spot on in how he sees data. That again, it's not a tool. It's not something that I can just buy and put on someone's desktop. It's actually a ecosystem. It's initiative. It's this kind of a mesh of different types of products, and we can take a look at how this can actually be built and expanded. And I think that Boris, in a way, is kind of unique in his view. There are other analysts who believe that, again, still analytics is more like Excel++. It's still very much like a visualization tool, and I think he is actually very good. So let's start with the first, and I will spend like 5-7 minutes on each one of these topics, and if you have any questions about it, I will actually share my perspective how to actually go and build this. So let's start with impactful via insights-driven action, because this is why we do analytics. This is where ROI comes from. It comes from that impact. There's no point to do BI analytics if you don't focus on impact. And if you look at kind of the evolution of BI, and again, I'm sure that everyone sees the same, historically, this kind of impact was limited. I have these my own 3 levels or 3 kind of generations of BI. BI started as kind of a desktop product that someone put on their tool, on the notebook, and that's where you analyze your data, that's where you visualize your data. Obviously, very limited impact because it's only available to very few people who then put it into a PowerPoint slide and email it to the rest of the company. So that's kind of, if you kind of look at that first generation, what I would call the tool-centric, batch-oriented BI, that had a very limited impact. Then about 10 years ago, we started to work on the cloud analytics and web-based analytics and web browser analytics. And that's no longer tool-centric. You don't even know. You can go to a dashboard and you may see 15 charts and they may all come from different systems. So that one is no longer tool-centric. That one is web-centric. That's obviously much more real-time, much more shareable. But again, the access to it and trust in data is probably quite limited if I go to someone's highly static dashboard and I see some data sets that I have no idea what they mean and they came from. We believe that the future of analytics is in applications. I agree with people who claim that applications will be the only ways people will consume data in the future. And if you ask me what's my favorite BI example, if anyone asks me like, give me the best example of BI, I usually say, look at your Uber front page. If you go to Uber, you see location analytics, you see data, you trust the data, you see all the key metrics, how quickly the cars will come to you. In the previous generation, I would go to Uber, I would download a CSV file, I would put it into my Tableau, I would try to visualize it, and 10 minutes later, I would come to a conclusion that that's the car that's closest to me. And maybe not, maybe I would be completely wrong because I don't know that data set. And so that's kind of that experience. Think about that experience. That needs to be the experience, how people kind of view data. And because it's trusted, I immediately became like location analyst. I know exactly, I see the map, I see the cars, I see the types, I see all the key metrics and so on. And if I want to go deeper, I can. And I know it takes me to the next level, and that is I can actually order my car. And what is that? That's the action. I can actually do action straight from my tool. I don't need to go again to export a CSV file and load it in Marketo and send some emails. So this is how applications will actually enable this much richer experience and much more integrated experience, the insights to action. And as a small example, Good Data as a product company, we have about 250 requests from our customers how to do impact, how to actually do impact. For some people, it's like, I want to see it in Slack. Some people want to see it connected with some applications. Some people want to see notifications and text messages and so on. So we have about 250 requests from our customers how they would like to see the impact to be translated into an action. And that obviously is not scalable. You cannot have a tool that has 250 widgets and so on. So I will talk about it on the next slide, how to solve it. And obviously, you need to have alerting and push notification. Those are some of the table stakes. And the last piece is, a lot of these kind of impact action and so on will actually lead to optimization, that you actually create a closed loop. Again, that's an example of Uber, where I actually, by interacting with this application, I'm actually driving data back to them so they can actually design how to optimize the cars and so on. Again, it's no longer BI and analytics. It's no longer a kind of a last mile. Some people call it a data exhaust. That's not what it is. It's kind of an optimized system. So how do we solve it? How do we actually build? How do we actually enable this? Once we go beyond our tools and web and we look at analytics as applications, how do we actually do this? I like Gartner perspective on this one. They actually call it a action framework. They believe that the future of BI in this action framework, where every company, every tool will have this kind of action framework and will be kind of combined with some sort of a low-code, no-code tooling so that people can actually build their own actions. They can actually go and say, hey, if this happens, go and send me an email, or start this event, or build actually build this kind of activity and workflows and so on. Go to Slack and post a message in Slack. So that's again, it cannot be a static tool that offers like a few ways how to interact with data. There needs to be this action framework. And again, low code, no code, as we know, is the most approachable way how non-technical people can actually build their applications. If you give anyone a JavaScript or a Java framework, that's not going to be helpful. It has to be possible with few lines of code. We actually at Good Data, we call it not the best name. We call it dashboard plugins, which doesn't sound like action framework, but it does exactly that. And our customers are successful because of this, because we actually give them this ability to take actions from their BI and connect it with their systems and planning and optimization and so on. And again, analytics needs to be a closed loop, and action framework is one of the ways how to get to it. Any question on this one? So let's go to the next one. Let's actually look at the next item on Boris's list, and it's augmented capabilities infused with AI. And I could spend 10 hours talking about it. I actually have questions from the audience already about it. And here I have to say that first of all, what does it even mean augmented? What does it mean infused with AI? There are so many definitions. My definition is that essentially data and AI and ML makes the user a better analyst. It actually helps with analytics, helps with understanding, helps with comprehension, helps with data literacy. So I'm a huge believer in kind of augmented and AI technology. There is one problem with that, and the problem is that BI companies and visualization companies and so on are just one of many use cases of AI. So if you actually look at AI and ML, analytics is just a small piece. Most of the AI deals with systems of data kind of engines and data platforms and so on. So it's very unlikely that some BI company will actually build their own proprietary AI system that's going to be better than what the industry is building. So if I look at kind of how to solve this, I see this kind of a huge volume of innovation coming from the AI community that we as a BI and analytics industry have to reuse and not to compete with it. What I'm saying, don't buy a BI tool that has embedded proprietary AI capabilities. Those will be outdated in 6 months. And that's why I put here all of these kind of different types of Python technologies that are open source. And those actually are the cutting edge. Those technologies are the kind of and not just obviously Python, but everything what Databricks and Snowflake and everyone else does and DataRobot does around AI. You just need to integrate with it and not try to compete with it. Again, a BI tool should not be kind of proprietary AI tool. You should be leveraging your standard AI tools. And that's why I like Python and so on, because that's kind of the language of AI ML. And that's probably, you will find the most standardized technologies, people who know how to use it, the most flexible models and so on. And so our task as the BI industry, and again, I'm talking here about the future of BI and analytics, is not to replicate it and reinvent the wheel. Our task is how do we actually best integrate these technologies into our BI and visualization and analytics frameworks? And how do we do it in a way that's, again, it's standardized and open and transparent. And if you look at most of the announcements in this area come around Python. You know, Snowflake just announced a very large Python initiative. We announced our Python SDK last week. So Python seems to be the language that will actually connect AI and BI. So that's the first problem. So the second problem is, how do we actually, and I actually have a small example here, how we actually, I'm getting to the second problem, and that is, do we have, and I'm getting to the second problem, and that is it even possible for BI tool to have AI capabilities built in? Because we have so many domains, the AI is so domain specific, all the domains and AI specific. So how do we actually, you know, we work with companies like Visa and on, you know, they have a fundamentally different models and domains that someone dealing with transportation data or nuclear fusion data and so on. So I also believe that it's very difficult to expect that you will buy a BI tool and it will come out of the box with some sort of a predictive capabilities. That it may be some basic, you know, statistical function and some basic predictive things, but definitely not advanced AI models. And one of the questions I got from the audience is, what's my level, kind of how I see the NLQ and natural language processing, natural language queries technologies. And so I see those kind of as two different buckets. I will spend a couple of minutes on that because that's definitely NLQ and NLP is form of augmented technology. The NLP, natural language processing, and NLG, natural language generation, we see a lot of that. And again, it's very kind of domain specific. If you work on Wall Street and you have to provide commentary on hundreds of companies, NLG is the best model. You just build a model that can actually do it. But again, it's very specific in terms of domain. You know, you train that domain and so on. If you look at other domains like again, financial services is probably the best domain for NLG because the data set is quite uniform. It has some sort of a standardized semantic model. You can actually build it and translate a model. I personally don't believe that I will ever see a tool that will take a random data set and will be able to actually interpret it out just based on that kind of data. That you have to have that domain-specific model that knows, hey, I'm dealing with financial data, I'm dealing with payments data, I'm dealing with medical data. So these kind of domain-specific models need to be there. And the same problem, and this is where we actually agree with Gartner, the same problem is the opposite. How do you actually do natural language querying? Is there a tool that can essentially replace Tableau, that you would actually take your CSV file and you would ask a bunch of questions and the tool would actually interpret it for you? I don't think that's possible. I think you have to have some sort of, again, domain specific. You have to have a NLQ system that actually understands that domain, is trained for that domain. You know, we have customers in smart buildings. You know, their domains are fundamentally different than, you know, again, healthcare and so on. So integration with third-party tools, focus on semantics, focus on kind of open source technologies, APIs. You know, I put here a chart how we actually do like NLG in good data, where we actually do a very small piece of it. We do the semantic modeling, querying, and so on. But most of the ML processing, ML modeling, kind of the machine learning and so on, that actually happens in some sort of a standardized Python tool that may even come with the best model and That's probably the future of how people will actually approach NLQ and NLP in analytics. And I would say in kind of a data visualization and analytics in general, there are some problems that are some sort of a horizontal, like data cleansing. I can see a machine learning model that understands quality of data at some level, some basic level, so I can actually see that there might be some of the out of the box augmented technology, but most of it will be essentially cooperation between your BI tool, your AI, BI team, AI team, your visualization team, and again, building this kind of ecosystem and leveraging these best practices and models through some sort of open source and some standardized technologies. And so the next one is probably the most complex topic in analytics. Boris calls it unifying all decision analytics data sources and data types. Last time I checked, I counted like 50 different cloud data warehouses with different types of semantics. There are so many different approaches, again, data mesh and data fabric, you know, that Gartner is pushing. So analytics, again, is not an island. And maybe that's what I should actually define. I do believe that historically, BI and analytics was essentially an island. You know, how many of you have analytics that has like, you know, disaster recovery and best practices and CI/CD and all of these best DevOps practices that we actually use for everything else in a company except BI? But it's kind of best efforts, you know, you just, again, it's kind of the last mile of data. And I think that you know, this kind of notion that analytics is an island, that I take my, you know, big data platform and I export it into a CSV file and I put it into Tableau, you know, that's one of the problems. And that's what I see all the time. I see, you know, most large enterprises I'm dealing with have very advanced Hadoop machines and data warehouses and so on. And then they actually do these kind of aggregates and exports, and they put it into a Tableau file that, you know, is 6 months old and contains a fraction of the source data, and that's kind of the availability of the data. So this is the biggest problem, and this is the problem where, you know, the data trust comes from, because by the time I see that data set as a consumer, I have no idea how was it massaged, who massaged it. I don't know. You know, again, we have customers with tens of thousands data extracts in the Tableau servers. Most of them are 99% are duplicates and so on. So this kind of integration with your data infrastructure is one of the key kind of future aspects of analytics. And again, analytics not as a tool, but as an ecosystem. If you look today, if you look at BI tool from 10 years ago and you look at BI tool today, you will see fundamentally different composition of that tooling. You know, you have, we used to do modeling in or data transformation in BI. Now we do it in dbt. We used to do in-memory in BI. Now we do it in Databricks and Snowflakes because they are fast and efficient and so on. We used to do so many things in BI. So BI is now being kind of, you know, dismantled and decomposed in multiple pieces. So, you know, something that people call the modern data stack, that instead of having a monolithic tool that does it all, suddenly I have 15 different highly specialized tools that construct this new experience in like a, again, in like a value chain. That I do my modeling in dbt and I do my analytics and transformation there and I do my data processing in Snowflake and so on. So that's what it's going to solve, this kind of unification, is that, you know, is this kind of a focus not on putting everything into a BI tool, but making sure that all these BI tools can actually can work together, and not just BI tools. But you can say, well, that's awful. I will have 15 different tools. I will have to deploy it, manually test it, and so on. So how can any company, and it gets worse. So I will have 15 different tools, And I will have, you just sold me an idea of data mesh. So I have 15 tools across 6 domains. So I have 70 moving pieces, or hundreds of moving pieces, and so on. So how do we actually do this? And so the solution is actually something that that's called analytics as code. And again, if I go back to the fact that analytics is not an island, that we take best practices from other domains. So how does Amazon deploy 10,000 servers or million servers? Do they go and manually point and click? No. They have something called infrastructure as code. They actually put it into a piece of code for each server, and then they run that code 10,000 times. So we have to take the same concept into BI. We have to be able to actually externalize all the semantic models and permissions and security and changes and again, visualization and so on. We have to actually take it out of those tools into a piece of code, most likely Python again, so that I can actually run and provision my data pipeline in a piece of code that I can actually version, I can document, I can share, I can evolve, I can fork, and so on. So that's how you get actually to this large scale of analytics across 15 different tools and 5 domains, is that you actually move away from manual deployment and manual testing and just believing it actually works. You treat analytics as the rest of your infrastructure, and people deploy infrastructure with code. It's no longer done manually. So that's kind of the future of it. You put all of these kind of different types of archetypes in different again, documents and files. The key is continuous integration, continuous delivery, versioning in GitHub, so you can actually put all of these kind of pieces of the code in a centralized document. If you're interested, a friend of mine, Steve Jones, actually wrote, he is the CDO of Capgemini, and he wrote an article about it. He calls it killing the blobs. He believes that analytics today is a blob. How do you kill the blob? You actually have to put it into multiple small pieces, and then those small pieces can actually be deployed independently. So the next one, again, very difficult topic in BI, is working for all personas. And I was trying to find some examples of people assume that what is persona for BI is the analyst. But if you look at some of the studies, there are dozens and maybe 50, 60 different personas that analytics need to be able to service and kind of be appropriate for, relevant for, all the way from different types of ambassadors and scientists and implementers and so on. So definitely the BI persona was different 10 years ago than it is today. Today, it's like everyone in your company. And so what we do, we have to essentially, I don't know, this is not the best slide for that, but there's something missing when I move from my Google Slides to PowerPoint. But essentially, we have to support this kind of wide range of personas. And the only way how to do this is something that Gartner calls composable analytics. You don't build a pre-built model. You build these kind of Lego blocks of analytics, and you combine them together. So if I'm ultimate end user, I don't need to do anything. But if I'm a data scientist, I can compose my own analytics workbench. If I'm data engineers, I can actually go. I was trying to put it originally on this slide from left to right. On the left, you have all of these kind of highly technical people who deal with the APIs and Python and Swagger and Scala. And again, this is kind of where the analytics sausages are being made. And on the right side, you have your end users, and that's where you do the management and infographics and flexibility. But it's not just 2 words. It needs to be a continuum. And what makes it continuum is this concept of composable analytics, that I can actually compose it together. I have objects that I can actually put together on the same screen, with some sort of a low-code, no-code tooling. And these tools can actually come from multiple companies. It should not be a single provider kind of exercise, it should be very much like, again, ecosystem of different tools that I can put together, combine, and build with, again, with these kind of APIs and low-code, no-code tools. This is my favorite slide. This is kind of the typical, my marketing team tried to make it look better. And I said, no, that's not the point. The point is make it as ugly as possible, like don't clean it up. I just did a 5-minute search on I was looking for the, examples of BI deployments in enterprise. So these are your typical BI deployments in enterprise that take, 18 months to deploy, 6 months to change, very expensive, inflexible, slow, duplicate, and so on. So these are, and as you can see, I have 3 here. I could find hundreds. It's not a problem. And yet we live in a different world. Again, this is the example of BI being an island. We live in a world that looks very different when we build other applications. In other applications, we use cloud-native Kubernetes, we use microservices, we deploy, again, your advanced engineering team can deploy applications around the world from one push of the button, and yet in BI, that's not possible. So we believe that future of analytics, again, is in this kind of new modern infrastructure that's cloud native, that's based around kind of Kubernetes, microservices, because that's what the ecosystem requires. Again, we are no longer talking about a single end-to-end tool. We are talking about these kind of microservices. And especially today, when you have so many different requirements in terms of location, performance, data availability, compliance, and so on, having a one blob that takes 18 months to deploy, that's almost that's not the future. And again, we also see we see these kind of very complicated systems that take 6 months to change, and yet with this kind of new cloud native technology, you can actually deploy. You can write analytics as code, and you can deploy analytics at different types of permission rights in Europe, different rights in the US, different cloud in Asia, in different clouds, in different backend systems and so on, from one centralized CI/CD repository where you test all of your components, where you actually kind of build everything with tools like Flux and Helm and so on. So again, that's the future of analytics, and that's going to be the most painful one, because most of the BI tooling today, it was designed really kind of pre-cloud, and there's nothing that will, you can host it in a cloud, but that's about it. And so I'm at my last slide, and we will have some questions, and we have also questions from the audience. And this is actually my favorite slide, and because I'm very much focused on impact of analytics. How do we actually create impacts with analytics? How do we make sure that analytics is not something that data scientists do and put into PowerPoint slides and no one will ever see it? And so Boris defined this kind of analytics as pervasive and scale across enterprise. And the key word here is embedded in all digital workspaces and systems of work. And you can find so many McKinsey and HBR articles all about this kind of notion that analytics need to be embedded. It needs to be embedded in the decisions. And I don't mean technically. I'm not talking about embedding like a website. I'm really talking about, for analytics to be impactful, it needs to be embedded in decision. It needs to be available. This notion of the last mile needs to be solved finally. And that's the most difficult problem, because assumptions how we built analytics 5-10 years ago is that it's not real time, it's used by few people, it's highly manual, it's not repeatable, and so it's expensive, licenses are expensive, and so on. And suddenly we have to provide real-time analytics to everyone, trust it, it needs to be high performance, it needs to be It needs to be aware of the location so that it can do the right data permissions and legal stuff and so on. So many things that we expect. You just don't put a chart into Slack and make it work. Because in that Slack, everyone has their own channel. Everyone needs this to be personalized and so on. So this is why analytics in the future is really, the only way you can do analytics in the future is in the cloud. That's the only place you can have enough hardware and software and current technologies and cloud native and so on to actually make analytics highly pervasive, highly personalized, so that I go to my Slack channel and I see my data in my context with my applications and with kind of combined with other things, and I can trust it and so on, because I'm not looking at some 6 months old report that was exported from Hadoop to Tableau and in a static PDF file. And so this is a big change in expectation, what we expect from analytics, from static kind of everyone gets the same into highly personalized. And that is kind of the biggest change in terms of infrastructure and potentially cost. And this thing was not possible 10 years ago. We didn't have the hardware, we didn't have the kind of underlying technologies like Snowflake and Firebolt and Databricks and so on to build data apps that would actually scale to this level. And that will actually, again, that will change the expectation. And the final piece is this kind of embedding. And I'm getting to where I actually started. If you look at, again, when I say embedding, I don't mean a chart embedded in some Slack. I actually mean Slack being, again, going back to my example of Uber homepage, I believe that applications will be the ways how we will actually deliver analytics. If I go to my ERP application, I go to my CRM application, I go to my customer success application, any application that people use, that's kind of the system of work. Every system of work will have to become way how people consume data. It cannot be a second kind of pane of glass that I have to go to that's completely outside of my context, that I'm losing that context. Applications are context, and data needs to be delivered in this context. So that's my 45 minutes. We have a couple questions I have from the virtual audience, and we can open it for this audience as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Roman. I would like to begin with a question. Is it true that analytic penetration has not increased in the last 10 years? If so, why? And do you think the cloud and modern stack will drive the penetration?
So yes, analytics is the same where it was, 20 years ago. I started my career at Sybase, so I nothing changed since then. But I don't think that modern data stack will drive the penetration. I don't think it will drive it. It may a little bit enable it. What will drive it is different organization, different way how we actually approach data. Again, with data mesh, less centralized systems and so on. That will actually drive it. The fact that I know where the data is coming from, I'm trusting that team. That's all they do, and I can actually compose my own analytics because I'm building it on kind of a data products from people that are specialized in those domains.
Great answer. Questions from the audience? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm especially interested in your last comment about embed data in the application. So we actually, so I'm from NYU. We are planning to consider replacement of our ERP solution. And we spend a great deal of time to talk about data and reporting needs. And so the recognition is the ERP system has very robust reporting functions, but the data is not probably going to be enough considering the overall business needs. So are you saying that solution like good data could be leveraged to bring data back to the application, so then the delivery of data can all happen within the application, and then the data mesh, basically, right, can happen outside, like by using different technologies together. Just want to confirm my understanding.
Absolutely.
That's the vision
And there's actually, again, this is somewhere at MIT, you know. My vision is that, actually, if you look at kind of my vision for the future of data, I actually, you know, and this is what like SAP was invented a decade ago, and it's coming finally with Snowflake. The vision is that the ERP will not put data into some sort of a proprietary data store. The future is that ERP will actually store data straight into Snowflake. So that you don't need to do transforms and extract and so on. So there's going to be one store for all of your transactional data in ERP, and the same store will be possible. And believe me, this is not where the ERPs are today. What I'm saying is that ERPs will have to adapt. And so imagine like having one store that has all of your ERP data, that's transactional, that you have to do transactions, but also the same store does all of your analytical data. So you don't need to take data out of your transactional system and move it to your analytical system. Because in your solution, what you're saying today, with the current kind of technology, ERP systems put data into your transactional system. You take it out, you do some sort of ETL transformation, you put it into some analytical system like Snowflake, and then you can take good data and embed it into ERP. So that's kind of the current thing. In the future, I do believe there's going to be one data store for your transactional and analytics. And then it's going to be much easier. You still need analytic systems, you still need ERP,